In my last video, I talked about my experience with the first Resident Evil. To sum it up briefly, when I first played it, it was a game that I had neutral to slightly low expectations over. While the series itself is obviously huge, I never really heard too many things about the first game. It kind of reminds me of GTA a little in that sense. But in the case of Resident Evil, it seemed to me that in regards to the older games that most of the fan praise goes to the second game. Because of this, as a newcomer of the series, Resident Evil 2 was the one I was looking forward to the most, but I decided to place that one on the back burner because I wanted to start with the first game, at least so I could experience it. Well, to make a long story short, when I first played the game, I ended up liking it far more than I expected to. I can honestly say that it might very well be within my top 5 favorite games. That's how much I liked it. So with that in mind, my expectations for the sequel were now elevated sky high. I forgot about every other thing in my life that may or may not have been essential, and suddenly playing Resident Evil 2 is now the top priority. I ran out to my local retro game store and purchased Resident Evil 2 on the PlayStation. I came home, popped the game in, and thus continuing what would eventually become an addiction to a franchise I didn't know I needed. Thanks to this addiction, I've purchased almost every old Resident Evil game and I'm now officially broke. And the only way I'm able to afford more games is to resort to male prostitution. But before we get into that, let's talk about Resident Evil 2.
Resident Evil 2.
Lights, camera, cue montage. The story takes place after the events of the first game, following two new characters, Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield. Leon is a rookie police officer and it's his first day on the force. Claire happens to be the sister of Chris from the first game. At this point, I have to say that the biggest improvement this game has over the first game has got to be the story. In my review of the first game, I barely said much about the story, and that's mostly because I really had nothing to say about it. But with the second game, I'm actually invested with what's going on. Not to mention there's actual character development here with Leon and Claire, and I can actually connect with them, whereas the characters in the first game, I feel like they were just there to simply exist. And they really had no discernible attributes. Not to mention the only bad guy was Albert Wesker, who's one of those insufferable douchebags we all know and hate who wear sunglasses indoors. But in Resident Evil 2, the characters you play as well as the characters you encounter are unique in their own ways. They all bring something to the table. When it comes to Leon, he's young, brash, and reckless, but he ultimately steps up to the plate, and protecting the people around him always remains his top priority. I think it's a fair assessment that he's the underdog in this story. Claire is every little bit as brave as he is, but she's also tough and has a demeanor that's calm, collected, and cool. I also find that she has a nice, soothing voice.
Leon!
Leon! I'm sorry. Both Leon and Claire come with a side character. Along the way, Leon encounters Ada Wong, a mysterious woman who's supposedly looking for her boyfriend, John. And here's a fun fact, this technically wasn't the first time Ada was introduced. In the first game, one of the puzzles you had to solve involved deciphering a message that John wrote to Ada. At the time, I don't think that the people who made the first game intended for Ada to be anything more than a name referenced in a puzzle, but in Resident Evil 2, they decided to give her more of a pivotal role, I guess to tie everything in more. From a storytelling standpoint, I actually find that pretty cool. Ada would continue to be a recurring character throughout the series. From all the people I talked to, they seem to either love her or hate her. I guess that seems to be the idea because she's not really an ally, but she's also not a foe. In this game, I actually don't have a problem with her, but in Resident Evil 4 and the rest, I have to say I do find the routine a bit annoying. Just because it's always the same fucking routine with her. Leon is always infatuated with her, but she always remains out of his reach, and she always ends up becoming the anti-hero. Again, this plot works for me in Resident Evil 2, but in the other games it just gets stale after a while. It's like I don't know how many times you have to tell the same story. Also, out of every side character in the RE universe, there are others I would much rather see again. Barry Burton, for example, was one of few characters from the first game that I feel came close to having actual character development. I would love to see them do something with him again. Also, Rebecca Chambers was another side character I've always had a soft spot for. She was fortunate enough to star in her own game, Resident Evil 0, but unfortunately they haven't really done anything with her since. And speaking of Resident Evil 0, what about Billy? Why don't they bring him back? Quite frankly, I'd rather see any or all of these characters make a comeback than have to sit through the same song and dance with the one-trick pony Ada Wong. In general, that's kind of a complaint I have with the entire series, that certain things get repeated more often than necessary. The dynamic between Ada and Leon happens to be one of those things. But I guess a lot of people want it to continue indefinitely, but I'm not one of those people. As for Claire, she's on a mission to find her brother Chris Redfield, who went missing before trying to expose Umbrella. She joins forces with Leon at the very beginning, but the two of them are almost immediately separated. They don't regroup until the very end of the game. As Claire, you have to explore the Raccoon City police station to try and find the whereabouts of Chris. Along the way, you discover that before Chris disappeared, he was going to blow the whistle on the police chief that conspired with Umbrella. Now there's an outbreak and almost every person in the city is either dead or infected. As Claire continues to explore, she finds a traumatized child named Sherry who's been hiding from all the chaos in the precinct. We find out that Sherry plays more of a pivotal role in this whole ordeal than we were led to believe. She's the daughter of William Birkin, a renegade scientist that worked for Umbrella and created the G-Virus, which is basically a superior version of the T-Virus. Once Umbrella caught wind of him going rogue on their operations, they sent the Hunk Squad to confiscate his stuff. They end up shooting and fatally wounding him and taking his samples. As a last resort, he injects himself with the G-Virus, which turns him into a super G-Virus mutant that continues to transform all throughout the game. He's definitely one of the most memorable adversaries in the Resident Evil universe. Then there's William's wife and Sherry's mother, Annette, who tries to protect William's research and legacy. We get the vibe that neither parent spent much time in Sherry's life because they were both consumed by their life's work. Kind of like how I'm consumed by these games. But anyway, now because of this, Sherry's by herself seeking refuge from a situation that seems apocalyptic. Claire ends up protecting her and becoming like a maternal figure that Sherry never really had in her life. Because of this, I much prefer Claire's story over Leon's. The fact that she's willing to set aside her original plans to prioritize Sherry's safety makes her much more likable in my eyes. And the fact that Sherry's linked to the root cause of this disaster gives the story more meaning than the Leon and Ada dynamic. Also, another thing I find compelling about Claire's story, and it might even be my favorite part in the game, is when you encounter the police chief. The man is a psychopath, and it's made apparent when you first encounter him. I remember when I played this game for the first time, I found it so creepy that he had this dead woman lying on top of his desk. And even though he claims that she was attacked by zombies, it's obvious that he's the one who killed her. Then when you revisit the area, the two of them are gone, and you can't help but wonder what the hell is he doing with her corpse. It's one of those parts where your imagination starts to run wild. For a game released back in 1998, the subject matter is pretty extreme. As you progress, you start to learn more about the chief by reading private journals from the people who encountered him. You end up finding an investigator's report that he had a history of raping women, and you also learn that he had ties to Umbrella. Eventually, you find his own journal where he brags about killing the woman he had on top of his desk, referring to her as a trophy, and then confessing that he misled the public about the virus outbreak because he wanted everyone to stay and die with him. I love it when a story depicts an apocalyptic situation being partially caused by one man's insanity, kind of like Sterling Hayden's character from Dr. Strangelove. I'm sure most of you probably don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, but for those of you who are old like me and have good taste in movies, you should know. But with the story in Resident Evil 2, there's so many factors that come into play. Chief Irons plays a huge part in it, but there's also the dynamic between William Birkin and Umbrella, who are basically at war with each other. Leon, Claire, and Sherry are basically all caught up in the middle of an extremely bad situation, and it's the epitome of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I mean, you gotta feel so bad for Sherry. She really has the most tragic story out of everyone in this game. Imagine being in this apocalyptic situation. Pretty much everyone you know is dead. You're in this police station surrounded by zombies. Your father's turned into a monster, like literally he's not even human anymore. And up until this point, the only other living person you had to rely on was the police chief, who's basically lost his mind and wants to kill everybody. Like, how does that not make her the most tragic character? And it makes you love Claire so much more. Like, when you put it all in perspective, it makes Claire more heroic. The relationship between her and Sherry reminds me of the relationship between Lieutenant Ripley and Newt from Aliens. It's very similar, actually, with the way that Sherry's left to survive on her own, crawling through tight spaces and ventilation shafts. I see a lot of James Cameron influence in this game. But after all the stuff that Sherry and Claire have been through, the nightmare still doesn't end. In efforts to obtain William Birkin's research, Umbrella sends a tyrant known as Mr. X who continuously stalks Claire and Sherry. All throughout the game you end up encountering him, and you could choose to either escape or stay and fight him. I personally always avoid him, because even if you decide to fight him, it doesn't matter if you beat him, because he'll continue to come back and you'll inevitably have to fight him at the end of the game where he mutates into a super tyrant. Not to mention, you also run the risk of using up ammo and health when you stay to fight him early on. Now, one important thing to mention, if this is your first time playing this game, is that there's a specific way to play it in order to experience the full story. In the beginning, I was not aware of this, and I thought that all you had to do was just play the game as Leon and then play it as Claire, but later I found out that the story actually has 4 modes in total. There's Leon A and Claire B, which align with each other, and then there's Claire A and Leon B, which I've heard is the canonically correct way to experience the story. Personally, I find this whole mode thing to be a little excessive and stupid, but whatever. That's just me, I guess. I just think that it's dumb to have the player burn themselves out by replaying the same game 4 times, but I guess they had to come up with some way to give it replay value. Now, unfortunately, I had trouble figuring this out because my dad dropped me on the head too many times as a baby, but it basically all depends on how you want to start the game. In order to trigger the Claire A/Leon B story, you first have to start the game as Claire, which automatically puts you at Claire A, and once you've completed it, the game sets you up with Leon B. Basically, in order to trigger a B mode for either character, you first have to complete an A mode. I feel like most players would feel naturally inclined to start the game as Leon since that's the first selection the game presents you with, but if you start the game with Claire instead, you'll end up experiencing what's supposedly the true ending. Some of the differences are subtle, while others are major. In Claire A/Leon B, Leon is the one who ends up being stalked by Mr. X, whereas Claire never encounters him. By the end of the game, Leon ends up finishing off both Mr. X and William Birkin in their final form. Now, I have to be honest, I actually don't really like this version of the story. I much prefer the Leon A/Claire B version, especially with Claire B because I like the fact that she's the one who faces Mr. X. I don't know, to me it just fits the narrative better. Not to mention the concept of a woman and defenseless child being stalked by a monster just seems inherently scarier than when it's just Leon who, let's face it, is a guy. I mean, look at any famous slasher film like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Halloween, and the final girl is usually a girl because it's just scarier. It's a tradition that's proven to work. And Mr. X is basically a slasher villain, like Michael Myers. He never runs, yet he always manages to catch up with you, and every time you put him down, he keeps coming back. I don't know, I just think it works better with Claire. Another reason I prefer Claire B is because at the very end during the final fight with Mr. X, you end up being saved by Ada Wong, who appears as a silhouette. This happens with both Claire B and Leon B, but I prefer it in Claire B because up until this point, both Claire and Ada have never actually met each other, so I find it kinda cool how this is their first and only interaction. There's a cool sort of mystique to it, and by the end of it, Claire still doesn't know who Ada is, and the fact that Ada appears as a silhouette makes her come off as a mystery woman, which makes sense because in Claire's eyes, Ada is a mystery woman, whereas in the Leon version, he automatically knows it's Ada, so it doesn't make any sense to have her appear as a silhouette. It's as if it was purposefully intended for Claire. Now that we got that out of the way, let's cover the gameplay. It follows the same formula as the first game. The objective is to survive against zombies while exploring the environment and solving puzzles. There's really not a whole lot that they changed from the first game. I guess Capcom knew better than to try and fix something that wasn't broken. Instead, they made some enhancements where there was room for improvement. The shitty voice acting and the live-action FMV that made you feel like you were watching a bad softcore porno was now a thing of the past. At this point in time, I think that Capcom knew they were sitting on top of a gold mine and they didn't want to make any mistakes. The cutscenes were now fully computer generated, and by 1998, this was probably seen as peak. Upon first glance, you could see that they improved the graphics, especially with the characters. In the first game, they looked like those shitty, blocky action figures that didn't even look like they were rendered properly, but in this game, they look like actual human beings, a major step up. And now, let's look at the pre-rendered backgrounds and the exquisite attention to detail. It reminds you that this game truly is a work of art. It's like every shot tells its own story. You could spend countless minutes observing these visuals like any work of art. And speaking of which, one of my favorite things to look at is this painting you find in the chief's office. Let's be honest, how awesome is that painting? It's so dark and ominous, but it's friggin' cool. I want that painting. No joke, but I probably spent the better half of an hour doing reverse image searches to try and find an original copy that isn't badly pixelated. I would gladly purchase it if it still exists, but so far I've had no luck. There's also tons of threads on Reddit with other people asking the same question. So hopefully one day someone at Capcom will catch wind of this and possibly revive and release a full high-def copy. Again, I would love to purchase it and hang it on my wall. Anyways, as far as the game's playability is concerned, it basically plays the same as the first game. There's really no difference. It uses the same tank controls and the fixed camera angles, but the one thing that the sequel does is ramp up the intensity. I don't think there's a single person who played this game for the first time that didn't get stumped on the first screen. If ever there existed a part that puts your tank control skills to the test, this is it. Because of this, I'd actually argue that Resident Evil 2 might not be the best one to start with, especially if you're not used to the tank controls, because this beginning portion is really unfair to a newbie. Actually, I kinda have a theory that the reason why so many people complain about the tank controls is because they made the mistake of starting with Resident Evil 2, when really they should have started with the first game, because there, at least you had a minute to get used to them. Another thing you'll have to prepare for is that there are far more zombies in Resident Evil 2. When they attack in clusters. You'll often find yourself in situations where you're backed up in a corner with multiple zombies headed your way. Evading them can be tricky, and oftentimes you'll find yourself using your most powerful weapon, because when two zombies are closing in on you, a pistol isn't going to do much. Most of the things that this game improved on are a matter of convenience. When a text pops up, it moves much faster and you could skip through it unlike the first game. You also have the option to exit the game and return to the main menu, which I love. The first game didn't have that, which irritated me because if I accidentally loaded the wrong save, I would have to reset the console and sit through all the intros and bullshit. Which, by the way, is another thing I love in Resident Evil 2. Whenever you die, the game takes you straight back to the main menu. In other words, it doesn't put you in a position where you have to keep tapping the button to skip the opening titles and shit. Minor things like that go a long way for someone impatient like me. Speaking of which, I love how whenever you obtain a map, it color codes the doors so you know which key opens them. It saves me the time and aggravation of exploring every area and using up ammo to eliminate enemies blocking a door when really I have no clue whether the key I have opens it or not. And then if it doesn't, I have to deal with the aggravation of knowing that I wasted a trip and used up ammo on enemies I didn't have to because I was searching the wrong area. The game also has some cool features. When a zombie latches onto you, you can fight them off, which is pretty cool, and when you kill them, their bodies start spasming on the floor, which is a neat little effect. This game also has the most violent death screen, in my opinion. Resident Evil 2 definitely excels in the scare department, even though this game is clearly dated, and obviously we live in an era where people are desensitized to this kind of stuff. The jump scares are still surprisingly effective. Even after beating this game multiple times, some of the jump scares still made me flinch. The game is chock full of memorable highlights. I love the part where you approach the window and this happens. That, my friends, is the first ever introduction to the licker. In this game, I guess they were meant to serve a similar purpose as the hunters from the first game. Like, they're not regular zombies, but instead they're like these advanced prototype species that are harder to deal with. The soundtrack is amazing, quite possibly the best in the entire series. It's so good that the 2019 remake actually has a DLC where you could swap the soundtrack with the original. It's creepy, sinister, atmospheric, and above all, it's distinctive. I ain't confusing this soundtrack for any other game. I love the song that plays when you're in the library. Another thing I appreciate in Resident Evil 2 is how both Claire and Leon have different perks and advantages over each other. My biggest gripe with the first game was the fact that there was a glaring imbalance involved when it came to the playability of the two main characters. They completely spoiled Jill and gave her almost every advantage over Chris imaginable, from having a grenade launcher to more inventory space and being able to unlock everything in the game. It's clear to me that the game developers wanted Chris to be the hard mode while Jill the easy mode. But this isn't made explicitly clear to someone playing the game for the first time. It's also confusing because Chris is the first selection and Jill is the second, when in most games, usually the easy mode is offered first. But regardless, even if it's meant as a difficulty setting, the treatment you get when you play as Chris is absolutely ridiculous. It would be one thing if the game made it hard by giving you less ammo and increasing the number of enemies or making the enemies tougher to kill, but instead to make the difficulty based on the fact that you only had 6 item slots and you had to keep finding disposable keys was, in my opinion, just awful. Resident Evil 2 is a major improvement in this regard. Both Leon and Claire start off with 8 item slots, which is how it should be. And yes, Claire's the only one who gets to have a grenade launcher and a lockpick, but Leon exclusively gets the Magnum revolver and the shotgun, so both characters have a slight advantage over each other. This game also allows you to make choices in this regard. At one point, you come across a locker containing an SMG and a side pack. You have the option to either take both or take one and leave the other for when you play as the second character. It all depends on who you want to have the advantage. Personally, I think that between these two items, the side pack will give you the biggest advantage because it increases your inventory space, which I'm all for. As for the SMG, I don't think it really gives you as much of an advantage as you might expect. I think people commonly make the mistake of assuming this gun is more powerful than it actually is, and they end up saving it for a boss fight only to find out that it basically does the same level of damage as a handgun. But I do think the SMG serves a good purpose because you can use it against regular opponents to save your handgun ammo, and then you can use the weapons that are actually powerful against bosses, like the grenade launcher and the Magnum revolver. Again, I like the fact that this game gives you a little freedom to make your own decisions and strategize like this. Okay, I'm sorry. That's the last time I'll do that, I promise. But let's be honest, I can't be the only person who's done that. Anyways, what else can you say about this game? In a nutshell, Resident Evil 2 is a fan favorite. Many people say it's peak, and if I had a nickel for every time I've heard someone say it's their favorite video game, I'd have enough money to quit my job and afford the original Silent Hill on PS1. From what it seems, out of every old-school Resident Evil game, fans tend to either lean towards the second game or the fourth game as the best game in the series. But if you're asking me, I wouldn't go with either of them. Personally, I think that trophy belongs to the 2002 GameCube remake of the first game, but I digress. That'll be a different topic for another video. But as far as Resident Evil 2 is concerned, I definitely think it shines as one of the better games from the old era of Resident Evil, but does that mean I share the favoritism that the other fans have? No, in fact, this may come as a surprise to some people, but out of the original trilogy, this is actually my least favorite one. And that's not a knock against it, I still think it's a masterpiece, but I still prefer 1 and 3. And you can't sit there and pretend that I haven't been singing this game's praises for the past 20 minutes, but by no stretch of the imagination do I think that this is a perfect game. In fact, there were some things about it that frankly annoyed me. First and foremost, I'm not a fan of the camera angles. I mean, sure, they look nice and they have that great cinematic quality, but in this game, I find them obstructive, and I think that part of the problem lies in conjunction with the fact that there are so many enemies and they all end up on the same screen blocking your view. But also, the placement of the camera angles just seem to defy common sense and deliberately inconvenience you. And I understand that it's meant to lend to the survival horror effect of not knowing what's in front of you, but to me, there's a fine line between scary and annoying. And in this game, it crosses that line and it becomes almost comically annoying. Somehow I found that it worked better in the first game. Whenever I ran into an enemy off screen, it would genuinely scare me, and it would always make me feel a great deal of tension knowing that an enemy was coming my way from off screen. In Resident Evil 2, I don't really experience that feeling. I just end up getting fucking pissed and then I start yelling at my TV screen, hoping I can make the angle change with my mind. I mean, look at this shit. Honestly, who the fuck wants to look at this shit? And how am I supposed to do anything when I can't even see myself? I mean, look at this. You're gonna tell me they couldn't find better angles than this? Another thing I find excruciating has gotta be the escort missions with Sherry. If you run too fast, you end up losing her, and then you have to go back and find her, which is about as fun as letting Edward Scissorhands give you a prostate exam. And what's really funny is that Claire doesn't even run that fast, and you won't even get that far away before Sherry just randomly decides to stop dead in her tracks and waits for you to come back. Some people might try to justify it by saying she's a small child and it's natural for her to act this way, but if you read the instruction manual, she's supposed to be 12 years old. On what planet does a 12-year-old kid act like this? Also, let's be honest, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility for her to keep up the same pace as Claire. On top of that, there were a few times during my playthroughs where Sherry started malfunctioning and couldn't figure out where to go. Look at this. Even here, Sherry couldn't fucking keep up with me. Where's she going? She can't even get used to the tank controls. Alright, you little pain in the ass, come on. Look at this, she just stops right there and goes. Sherry, I'm right here. What the fuck? She's stuck. You gotta be kidding me, bro. Thank God I'm streaming this, because when I make a video about this, at least I'll have the evidence to prove that this is a pain in the ass. Look at this. Oh my God, are you fucking kidding me? Oh, they're gonna rise. Yep, I knew it. And she's gonna fucking hold still now. The worst possible time. You fucking stupid kid. I also noticed a couple of inconsistencies with the gameplay. I'm not gonna lie, I forgot some of them, but there's one in particular I remember that kind of annoyed me. There's two parts where you have to use a key card to get through a door. The first one doesn't allow you to open the door by simply tapping a button like you would with a key. Instead, you have to select it from the inventory menu. Okay, fair enough. But then later, during the second part, you can do it by hitting the button. So what's up with that? I mean, is this an earth-shattering problem that hinders the experience? No. Was that an insanely petty complaint I just made? Yes, most definitely. In fact, if Guinness Book of World Records has an award for the pettiest complaint, then they should probably watch this video. But, in my defense, let's be honest, what other opportunity would I ever have to bring this up? Probably never. Aha! See? You can't fight with logic. Also, I'm finally gonna address the elephant in the room. Why'd they give Mr. X a BBL? Look at that. Why would Capcom do that? That was a conscious decision that someone on the development team made. But now, I'm gonna tell you what my biggest gripe is with this game overall, and I made sure to save it for last. It's a shitty mechanic that this game introduced, and unfortunately, it followed in some of the later games, when really, I think it should have never existed to begin with. And that is the fact that when you're critically injured, you slow down and move at a turtle's pace. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand what they were going for. It's nice to have some kind of visual indication that your character's almost dead. That's why they should just leave it to the character holding onto their waist. Frankly, they don't have to slow me down. And for all you people who say you like it because you think it makes the game realistic, shh. Okay? Shh. Shh. And let's be honest, that's a dumb argument. In real life, if you're critically injured, that doesn't mean you develop cerebral fucking palsy. And it's not like the zombies are specifically attacking your legs. And some people might say that this feature makes the game scarier because enemies catch up to you faster, which, okay, fine, that's great. I mean, whatever helps you sleep at night. But listen, I don't like being slowed down. This wasn't a feature in the first game, therefore I consider this a downgrade. And in the later games on GameCube, they did away with the limping, so evidently someone on the development team must have agreed with me. Now listen, I'm not one to belabor a point, but let me just tell you, I despise this feature. I mean, look at this. It reminds me of the way I run when a hot chick police officer is trying to catch me. Look at this shit. And you might think I'm gonna do the professional thing and cut to the next topic, but no, I'm making you watch this. Especially if you're the type who defends this feature. Now I'm gonna be passive-aggressive and make you sit through my limping. Alright? Now, I want you to pay attention. See this shit? Can't believe this shit. I mean, look at that. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Motherfucking assholes got me all limping and shit. You see that? Oh, look at that. Oh, see that? No, now see that shit? Oh, okay, I see how it is. Oh, shit. Oh, look at that. Now, you see what just happened right there? Oh, okay. See, you got an asshole over there who is misbehaving. Oh, and while I'm limping like I got a pebble in my shoe and shit. See what I'm talking about? Oh, look at that. Oh, you see that? Oh, shit. I'm dead, motherfucker. I'm dead. Look at that. Look at that, man. Look at that. Fucking lying there dead and shit. Now, those are all the issues I have with this game, and in the grand scheme of things, none of them are really that bad, and they don't hinder the experience. However, I still prefer 1 and 3. With the first game, I admit it's mostly for subjective reasons. Yes, 2 is technically a superior game, but the first game left more of an impression on me. One thing that I actually thought was definitively better in the first game was the puzzle solving. The way you had to unlock certain areas and decipher hidden messages made the gameplay very fun and rewarding. In Resident Evil 2, I felt like there wasn't as much of that. It felt more action-based to me, and I found the puzzle solving kind of forgettable. Also, am I the only one who feels like the first game had better boss fights? In Resident Evil 2, I feel like you're just fighting the same bosses over and over again, and it's mostly just you fighting with William Birkin and his offsprings. I mean, of course there's the part where you kill the giant alligator, but would you really qualify that as a boss fight? I don't think I would. And of course at the end of B mode you fight Mr. X, but it's literally an exact duplicate of the Tyrant boss fight in the first game. I mean, look at this. It's the exact same fight matched up to a T, and it ends the same way too. There's not a single shred of originality whatsoever. You remember the movie The Hangover Part 2? Remember the complaint that people had with that? Well, that's my complaint with this game. When you break it down to its core, it's really just a remake of the first game. The police station is basically just a new version of the mansion, and the way you have to navigate through it is almost identical. And once again, the game ends with you going to a lab that eventually self-destructs in a Metroid fashion. And I'm not trying to give this game shit or say that any of this is necessarily bad. In fact, I think it's good to stick with the formula that's been proven to work, but that being said, it does make me lean towards the first game just for its creativity alone. And last but not least, I'm probably in the minority on this, but I find the first game scarier. In Resident Evil 2, I feel like the fear factor mostly relies on jump scares and that sort of fast-paced adrenaline-induced fear, but that's not the only way to scare someone. There's also such a thing as suspense and atmosphere, and Resident Evil 2 has that, I'm not denying it, but in the first game, I've always felt this great deal of tension. There is something so unnerving about being trapped inside that mansion and not knowing what lies in the door ahead of you, and I think many people will agree that those parts where the door opens, aka the loading screens, were a part of what made the game so unique. And somehow, in the first game, I found those door opening sequences much creepier than they were in Resident Evil 2. And I'm willing to admit that I'm not able to logically argue or prove that point, it's only based on a feeling. But in Resident Evil 2, it feels like a loading screen, but in Resident Evil 1, it feels like something else. It brought on the illusion that made me brace myself and say, God, what is going to be waiting for me beyond this door? Another thing about Resident Evil 2 is that you spend most of your time in places like the police station and the city streets, which are all public and familiar places, which I think actually decreases the fear factor for me. In Resident Evil 1, you are in a mysterious and unfamiliar territory. Also, every memory I have of Resident Evil 2 I associate with there being interactions with the other characters. I mean, think about it, you're constantly interacting with other people, whereas in the first game, you were mostly alone, which I think made it creepier. And that's not to say that there are no interactions whatsoever, but almost every memory I have of the first game I always associate with the main character being alone, whereas in 2, you're always interacting with someone, which provides a sense of normalcy. I mean, obviously this is all subjective, and between both of these games, if you're going to ask me which one I recommend, then obviously I'd feel compelled to recommend the second game, because on paper, it's technically a superior game, and I admit I only prefer the first one as a matter of personal preference. Now, as for Resident Evil 3 on the other hand, I prefer that one for the opposite reason. I think that you can make the argument that it's almost objectively better than 2. I just feel like in every way it's a superior game. I mean, should I talk about it now, or should I wait till I actually cover that one in a separate video? I think that's the way to go. Now, if we're comparing these games from a storytelling standpoint, then that's probably the biggest area where the second game shines. If that was the only criteria we were supposed to go by, then yeah, I'd say that 2 wipes the floor with 1 and 3. But the thing is, at the end of the day, I'm a guy who prefers gameplay over story, and I'm a firm believer that a great story doesn't make a good game. In fact, if you were to ask me what I thought of the story in Resident Evil 1, I'd have little to almost nothing to say about it. If, however, you are someone who does prefer the story over the gameplay, then I'll say this much. Resident Evil 2 has one of the best stories, if not the best one in the entire series, and it's loaded with symbolism. People might not realize this, but the game is filled with subliminal messages that the game developers were clever enough to keep but not make too obvious, and those hidden meanings are very easy to miss if you're not paying attention. For example, if you notice, Leon is almost always associated with the color blue. He dresses in blue and his name font is blue in the save menu, and you might think that this is a coincidence, but I can assure you it's not. The reason why Leon is associated with the color blue is because Ada gave him a bad case of blue balls. See, all he really wanted was to serve and protect, but then she came along and distracted him with her 32-bit Kung Pao Coochie, which turned him into a simp. And if that wasn't bad enough, he ended up taking a bullet for her, but then she just walks away like she doesn't give a shit. Look at that. She just leaves him on the floor. I think every guy can relate to this, as it serves as a cautionary tale about messing with hoes. And possibly the most tragic moment in the game is watching him catch up with her and then he collapses right in front of her. He pretends it's from the bullet wound, but we all know that it's secretly because he wanted her to give him a nice Dutch rudder. But instead she refuses and decides to fake her own death. She thought maybe he'd forget about her and then go to the nearest Thai massage parlor. But his willpower was just too great, because as he's proven to us time and time again, if loving Ada is wrong, then Leon doesn't want to be white. Wow, that was bad. Holy shit, that was bad. I really want to apologize to whoever's watching this. I really am an asshole. I have assholeitis. Just know if you hit the dislike button and stop watching this video, I completely understand. Anyway, what was I doing? Oh yeah, I was reviewing a game. So yeah, in a nutshell, that basically covers everything with the game itself. Normally, this is where I would end the video, but there's still one last topic I want to address, and that is the different ports of this game, because honestly, this video would feel incomplete to me if I don't at least mention them. So even though I think most people recognize Resident Evil as PlayStation's baby, the sequel would later be released on Windows, the Nintendo 64, the Sega Dreamcast, and the Nintendo GameCube. And recently, Capcom decided to show some love to the fans by releasing the game digitally at the PlayStation Store. So if you happen to have a PS4 or a PS5, you could snatch it at a relatively cheap price. This version's been around since August 2025, and even more recent, around April of this year, an enhanced version of the game was released on Steam. Unfortunately, that's the one version I cannot play because I don't own a PC. But if I were to take an uneducated guess, then I would assume that the Steam version is probably the best way to experience the game. As for the console ports, they say that the GameCube version is the best one by far, and I believe it too, just based on the clips I've seen on YouTube. The Dreamcast version would probably be a close second. Unfortunately, the two of them are outrageously expensive. I would love to buy them, but you know, my last name isn't Vanderbilt. And you may wonder what any of this means to you, and the answer is probably nothing. If you're a casual gamer who doesn't care about any of this stuff, then your best bet would be to go with the Steam version or the PS5 version. They're cheap, easy to find, and they have the best quality. But if you're a retro game collector and connoisseur like me, then you might find this topic of discussion kind of interesting, and even if you're not, you might still find it interesting from a retrospective viewpoint. That being said, as a final chapter of this video, I'm not going to talk about the digital ports, nor am I going to talk about the GameCube or Dreamcast version. Instead, I want to end this video by talking exclusively about the N64 version, and I want to do a quick little versus battle between that and its PlayStation counterpart. After all, I think that this comparison is the most appropriate one because if you were a kid in the late 90s, then those were the two versions you were most likely to own. Another thing I want to add is that out of every port of this game, the N64 version is by far the most unique one. If you look at the Steam version and every other port, they all try to exclusively emulate the original PlayStation version, while the N64 kind of goes off on its own direction, and it basically remains as a standalone game with its own distinctive features that haven't been copied. Another thing about the N64 version is that it comes with a very interesting backstory. They say that one of the most impressive technological feats that's ever been accomplished in gaming history was the fact that Nintendo managed to condense and fit all the ROM data from not one, but 2 discs onto one primitive cartridge. If you want to get into numbers, they basically managed to compress 1.2 gigabytes of ROM data into 64 megabytes, and they still managed to make the game playable and even comparable to the PlayStation version, which till this day is seen as a technological anomaly. But what makes the N64 version so fascinating to me is that it was made on a system that's technically more advanced than the PlayStation, and in some areas it definitely shows, but in other areas the PlayStation version is more advanced because it had the advantage of more ROM data, so it's weird because it manages to be less advanced and more advanced at the same time. The most infamous downgrade with the N64 version is the look of the cutscenes. It's awful. Because of this, many people will complain and try to steer you away from the N64 version. But again, they deserve credit for being able to fit those same FMVs from the PlayStation version into a cartridge, even though it doesn't look as good. But now, forget about the cutscenes and let's look at the gameplay. You'll definitely see some differences between the two. The N64 version smooths everything out more, whereas the PlayStation version is very choppy and pixelated. This is definitely one area where you could tell that the N64 version was made on a more advanced system. However, I cannot say the same for the backgrounds. It would seem that as an effect from the loss of ROM data, the pre-rendered backgrounds were one of the many things that took a hit. This part in the library, for example, actually made me pause in disbelief because I couldn't believe how bad it looked compared to the PlayStation version. While the PlayStation has that bad pixelated thing going on, the detail and clarity is so much nicer, so score 1 for PlayStation just for the visuals alone. Another thing I had to get used to was the fact that on the N64 version, the screen does this weird little shaky glitch thing whenever I pull up the inventory screen. Not a big deal, but I did find it a little jarring at first. Also, I don't know if this is a common thing, but the N64 version, at least in my experience, seems very dark in comparison to the other ports. Some people might prefer it because it lends to the creepiness, I guess, but again, I tend to prefer the clarity with the PS1 version. Now, as for the audio, again, that seems to be another area where the N64 took a hit. When it comes to the voices, there's no comparison. The PlayStation version is better.
There's no reason for us to stay any longer than necessary. Let's split up, look for any survivors, and get out of here.
Right.
There's no reason for us to stay any longer than necessary. Let's split up, look for any survivors, and get out of here.
Right.
Huge difference, and I think the same goes for the music. I've read online sources that claim that the music in the N64 version has better sound, but I trust what my own ears tell me, and my ears tell me that those sources are full of donkey shit. When it comes to quality aspects with the sight and sound, the PlayStation version definitely has the upper hand. But now let's talk about performance, because this is where the tables turn and the N64 starts to kick the PlayStation's ass. The N64 version runs much smoother and quicker. The loading times, for example, are greatly decreased.
Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 2.
Also, I don't know what it is, but I feel like this game plays better on an N64 controller. It feels more natural to me. You have the option to either move with the D-pad or the joystick. If you go with the joystick, your character runs automatically where you don't have to hold a button. This way, you could pretty much play the game one-handed. However, I still prefer using the D-pad because in general, I think that the tank controls operate better with the D-pad rather than a joystick. There's also some alterations in the N64 version. The passcodes and usernames have been changed, so if you're one of those people that has 2236 hardwired in your memory to unlock the safe, then guess what? The N64 version is going to give you a new code to memorize. And remember how in the laboratory you had to type in guest for the username? Well, in the N64 version, they changed it to Annette Birkin be twerkin'. No, I'm just kidding. They changed it to Nemesis. The N64 version also added some extra files and documents contributing to the lore, which the PlayStation version does not have. And as I mentioned before, the N64 version offered some cool new features that aren't present in any other version. The most obvious one is the fact that you could change the color of the blood. It also gives you the option to tone down the violence, because remember, this is Nintendo after all, the kid-friendly brand. I actually find it hilarious because it almost seems like it was Nintendo's satirical way of patting the heads of every pissed-off parent by saying, "Here, we'll do this to make you happy." But meanwhile, I think those parents knew that they were fighting a losing battle. Mortal Kombat had already been around for several years, and games were gradually getting more and more violent. Another feature that the N64 exclusively had was the randomizer, so you'd always end up with different items at different places. At first, I was intrigued by this idea, but once I tried it out, I gotta say, I actually don't care for it. I kept getting red herbs for some reason, and it would be fine if you had an equal amount of green herbs to mix with it, but instead I ended up just getting red herbs, and I fail to understand the point. A red herb on its own is useless, and if you're going to completely botch the ratio of green herbs and red herbs like that, then it kind of defeats the purpose of having them. In conclusion, the novelty of having the randomizer, or the blood color change, or being able to tone up or down the violence really just serves as nothing more than a gimmick, and it really doesn't enhance the overall experience. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't other things about the N64 version that do enhance the experience. And that brings us to the single greatest feature that this port has that, in my opinion, beats the PlayStation version to a pulp, and that is simply the fact that it's all on one cartridge. On the PlayStation version, it is required to use both discs to experience all 4 modes. Disc 1 is Leon and Disc 2 is Claire. On the N64 version, you don't have to worry about that. If you want to play as Claire, you just select her. I mean, holy shit, I just realized that the PS5 version doesn't even give you this option. Well, okay, it technically does, but you have to click on an option that says change disc, and then it makes you have to relaunch the game as if you were switching to a second disc. The N64 simplifies it to where all you have to do is just simply click on the name. So in a way, not only is the N64 version a step up from the OG PlayStation in this one regard, but it's also a step up from the PS5 version. When you get to know me, you'll find that there are 2 things that define my personality. First and foremost, I'm lazy, and secondly, I'm impatient, and the N64 version of Resident Evil 2 appeases both of those traits. In summary, if you were to ask me which version I recommend, then it really boils down to preference. If you're the type who aims for visual and audio quality, then the PlayStation version is the obvious winner. If, however, you're lazy and impatient like me, you'll most likely prefer the N64 version as it runs a lot smoother and quicker. And again, I have to repeat myself by saying I do prefer the way this game plays on an N64 controller. Now, if you were to ask me personally which version I prefer, then I'll be totally honest. If I'm in a situation where I want to play this game and I only have a choice between these 2 options, then I'm probably going to go with the N64 version. But no matter which version you play, Resident Evil 2 is an undisputed classic. It's a fan favorite and a worthy addition to anybody's retro game collection. It left such an impact on the industry that I still continue to see its influence on countless other games. If you still haven't played it, then I'd say you're doing a disservice to yourself and you should definitely check it out. If you enjoyed this video, then you should stay tuned as I'll also be covering Resident Evil 3 and hopefully the rest in the series. And that concludes this episode. Take care, everybody. See you next time.